night had already descended upon Turin, settling over the narrow streets like a shroud of dark velvet. Yet this night was unlike others. It carried a heaviness in the air, one so palpable that even the stray dogs roaming the market square paused, as though sensing an unseen presence drifting through the alleys. The city, accustomed to noise and rough laughter and the thud of hurried footsteps, had fallen into a silence that felt strangely deliberate. From a distance, hovering on the edge between watcher and wanderer, the narrator observed the oratory of St. Francis de Sales. Its humble walls were pressed tightly between taller, more imposing structures. The gas lamps flickered restlessly along the street, sending soft halos of light that seemed too fragile to confront the darkness around them. And yet, inside those walls, a different kind of light, unseen, unmeasured, eternal, was beginning to pulse. Don Bosco, the priest whose life was woven between tireless labor and inexplicable grace, had retired to his small room after a long day of tending to orphaned boys, restless teenagers, and the wounded souls who flocked to him with the same desperation as the poor toward bread. The exhaustion that clung to him was not merely physical, it was spiritual, carved deep into his bones by compassion and by the unrelenting weight of responsibility. He knelt now before a worn wooden crucifix. The flame of a solitary candle cast trembling shadows against the walls, stretching and shrinking as though alive. His breathing was slow, deliberate, less the rhythm of a tired man, more the cadence of a soul standing on sacred ground. From where the narrator stood unseen, undefined, a silent spectator between realms, it was clear that something in the atmosphere was shifting. The air no longer rested the way ordinary air does. It vibrated gently, like the surface of a lake stirred by a breath that had no human source. The veil separating the visible from the invisible, that thin membrane through which heaven sometimes presses its face against earth, was thinning, softly, imperceptibly, but unmistakably. Don Bosco did not yet know, but the narrator did. The room around him seemed to shrink, not physically, but spiritually, as if all of creation were bending its attention toward this solitary priest. The noises of the outside world disappeared entirely, not reduced, not softened, completely erased, as if Turin had been momentarily lifted away and replaced with a field of profound and suspended quiet. There was a reason for it. Whenever heaven prepares to speak, the world holds its breath. Don Bosco clasped his hands together, leaning closer to the crucifix. His whispered prayers were not the confident petitions of a man accustomed to miracles, nor the desperate pleas of one in despair. They were the weary, honest words of a shepherd who had learned to expect nothing for himself and everything for those under his care. "Lord," he murmured, "guide me, guide them. They are yours before they are mine." The narrator listened, if one could call it listening. For in this state caught between a place and a presence, the narrator did not hear with ears but with an intuition that pulsed like a second heartbeat. Don Bosco's prayer was rising, not through the ceiling but through reality itself, and something beyond reality was leaning down to receive it. A faint shiver passed through the room. It was not cold, though the temperature did drop a degree, enough to cause the candle to flicker with sudden agitation. No, it was not the temperature. It was the kind of shiver the soul feels when a truth approaches, or when a presence enters a place not built to contain the infinite. And Don Bosco felt it too. His eyes opened, slowly, cautiously, not because he expected an apparition, but because he sensed that he was no longer alone. His room seemed unchanged, the crucifix, the table, the tattered books, the small bed pushed against the wall. Yet something was undeniably different. He rose to his feet. The candlelight trembled, casting strange, dancing shapes along the walls. The narrator saw it more clearly. The boundary of the room shimmered, only for a moment, as though the edges of reality had turned translucent. But Don Bosco, for all his spiritual sensitivity, did not recognize the sign. Instead, he simply stood still, waiting, listening. His heart beat faster not with fear, but with the instinctual reverence of one who had long ago surrendered his life to God's will, no matter the form that will might take. Outside, the wind began to stir, blowing through the seams of the window with a low, haunted hum. It rattled the shutters, whispered through the alleys, and then fell silent again. But the silence that followed was not empty. It was pregnant, dense, vibrating faintly with an anticipation that felt older than time. The narrator, suspended between the worlds, knew this silence. It was the same one that settled over Moses before the burning bush, over Elijah before the whisper on the mountain, over the shepherds before the angels tore open the sky. It was the silence before visitation, a silence that unravels certainty and prepares the human heart for wonder it cannot comprehend. Don Bosco took one hesitant step backward, not out of fear but out of humility, as though he sensed he was about to stand in the presence of someone infinitely greater than himself. The candle flame steadied suddenly. The air stopped moving. Even the shadows froze. Someone was approaching, and the veil, now stretched thin as breath, was ready to break. The room did not brighten, nor did it darken. Instead, it shifted quietly, subtly, the way a dream shifts when the dreamer becomes aware that he is dreaming. Don Bosco's small chamber, so familiar in its poverty, seemed to inhale as if drawing in some vast and unseen breath. The air grew dense, not with humidity, but with meaning. The narrator, hovering at the threshold where human perception dissolved into the supernatural, sensed the change more clearly than Don Bosco himself. What lay before the priest was not yet an apparition, but it was no longer mere reality either. It was a midpoint, a luminous tension between two dimensions, struggling to decide whether to remain separate or merge. This room, worn down by daily use, had become a frontier. Don Bosco glanced around, uncertain but unafraid. The crucifix on the wall looked the same, and yet its presence felt amplified. The wooden figure of Christ seemed to lean forward with a compassion so vivid that one could almost believe it had softened under the flickering candlelight. Don Bosco's heartbeat slowed, not because calm returned, but because something greater was approaching, something that quieted the body even as it stirred the soul. The narrator stood at the edge of the moment, with a feeling that could only be described as witnessing a doorway being carved in the midst of ordinary space. That doorway did not open outward, it opened inward, into a depth that could not be measured. And then it began. A faint glow gathered at the far corner of the room, not bright enough to cast shadows, not strong enough to replace the candle, but sufficient to declare itself as something other than light from this world. It shimmered softly, like the first illumination beneath the surface of water before dawn breaks. Don Bosco blinked. The glow remained. It did not move. It did not grow. It simply existed gently, but insistently, the way a truth stands firm, without needing to force itself upon a doubting mind. The narrator recognized it instantly. It was the pre-light, the threshold radiance that often precedes heavenly manifestations in the accounts of mystics. Not yet vision, not yet voice, but presence, pure presence, distilled into a quiet gleam. Don Bosco's breath caught. He took a step forward. The glow pulsed, and then the air thickened as though some immense silence were descending, not to suffocate, but to prepare the place for something sacred. Silence like this had texture, it had weight. It pressed gently against the skin, seeped into the mind, forced every wandering thought into captivity. It was the silence of waiting of heaven, pausing its breath until the human heart was fully open. The candle responded first. Its flame grew taller, thinner, shimmering with an unsteady determination, as though trying to compete with a light it could not comprehend. Don Bosco whispered, "Lord, if this is from you." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Heaven hears unfinished prayers as clearly as spoken ones. The narrator watched the priest's face, no fear, only humility. This was not a man startled by the presence of the supernatural. It was a man accustomed to surrendering his senses whenever God wished to use them. Don Bosco had lived too many moments where grace broke into ordinary time to react with panic. Instead, he reacted as saints often do, with reverent expectation. The glow shifted again. This time, it elongated subtly, rising upward like a column of pale, misty radiance. The air grew warmer around it, not with physical heat, but with a warmth that human language could not fully capture, a spiritual warmth, the kind that touches not the skin but the soul itself. The narrator felt it. It was the warmth one feels when stepping into a memory of being loved, even if one cannot remember who loved them. Don Bosco's knees went weak. He steadied himself with a hand upon the table. His lips parted as though to speak, but no sound emerged. His eyes remained fixed upon the forming light. And then, without warning, the objects in the room began to blur at the edges. The walls did not vanish, but they softened, their solidity thinning, as if the room had become permeable. The boundary between matter and spirit loosened, like a curtain caught in a breeze. For a brief moment, the narrator saw two rooms overlapping: the humble chamber of Don Bosco, and an expansive, luminous space beyond it. The two dimensions did not collide, they intertwined. This was the moment when heaven entered gently, respectfully, without violating the natural order but elevating it. The room had become liminal, a threshold place where both worlds coexisted. Don Bosco sensed the shift not with his eyes, but with his entire being. His heart recognized it before his intellect did. Something in him, some deep, ancient intuition placed there by faith, whispered, "She is near." The glow flickered, the air stilled again, and the narrator, standing in awe, recognized the unmistakable pattern. Heaven was not approaching with thunder or spectacle. Heaven was arriving the way Mary often arrives, silently, tenderly, choosing the quietest hour and the humblest room. The veil thinned, the glow brightened, the moment drew near. But she had not yet appeared. Not yet, for there is always a breath small, sacred, and nearly imperceptible before the mother steps into human sight. And Don Bosco, trembling yet steady of heart, was about to witness the most luminous breath of all. The glow in the corner of the room no longer trembled. It held its place with a quiet firmness, like a star refusing to be swallowed by night. Don Bosco stood still, hands loosely at his sides, as though any sudden motion might disturb the fragile equilibrium forming in the air. But nothing he did could hasten or hinder what was coming. The narrator, suspended in the seam between seen and unseen, perceived the change first. The light began to fold inward, gathering itself, condensing, not shrinking, but concentrating. It resembled a breath drawn slowly into the chest before words are spoken. Something, someone, was preparing to reveal herself, and the room responded. The candle that had flickered so anxiously before now steadied, its flame narrowing into a sharp, unwavering point. The shadows softened. The air thickened again, then warmed with a gentle radiance that was unmistakably maternal. Maternal, not merely gentle, but confident, encompassing, the way a mother's embrace fills not only the body but the very space around her. Don Bosco felt it before he saw anything new. His breath caught in his throat. His knees bent of their own accord. Not to kneel fully, he lacked the strength for that, but to acknowledge that the atmosphere had changed into something holy, something that demanded humility. Then the glow began to stretch upward, rising slowly until it reached the height of a standing figure. It held that form, a column of pale, opalescent light, without distinct edges, yet unmistakably human in its posture. The narrator recognized the moment. This was the prefigure, the luminous silhouette that often precedes the actual manifestation of the Virgin in the visions of the saints. Not an illusion, but not yet the fullness of her presence. A threshold of identity waiting to break into revelation. The column pulsed once, then again, and then, softly, gracefully, as though unveiling itself in slow motion, the light began to shape itself. A gentle outline appeared, first the faint suggestion of a head, then shoulders draped in something that moved like fabric but shimmered like starlight. The edges remained soft, as if carved from mist, but they carried intention, they carried presence. Don Bosco's eyes widened, tears welled, unbidden, blurring his vision. Not tears of fear, nor even tears of awe, though awe thundered through him like a silent storm. No, these were tears of recognition of a love that he had always known yet never fully seen. The narrator felt the recognition radiate from him like heat. Then, with a tenderness that seemed too delicate to belong to a supernatural moment, the figure became clearer. The light softened around it, shadows drifted away, and the room filled with a fragrance so subtle that it did not invade the senses, it simply hovered there. A memory of roses that had never grown in Turin, a scent that did not cling to the air but to the soul. And finally, the light resolved into her. The Virgin Mary. Not the Mary of paintings, frozen, idealized, distant. Not the Mary of statues, cold, marble, unblinking. This was Mary as heaven knew her, living, luminous, real. A presence more than a shape, yet a shape more real than the visible world. Her face was serene, though not in the way art depicts serenity. There was depth in her eyes, a fierce maternal strength beneath the softness, as though she bore the weight of every sorrow and every hope ever conceived by the world. Her expression held compassion, wisdom, and something unnameable, something like silent authority wrapped in gentleness. Her garments flowed not like cloth, but like light that chose to take the shape of cloth. A soft mantle, the color impossible to pin down, shifting between white, blue, and the faintest gold draped over her shoulders. It glowed without brilliance, radiated without overpowering. Don Bosco fell to his knees fully this time, his body bowed forward, forehead touching the floor, not because he chose humility, but because humility overtook him like an instinct. He trembled, not the trembling of fear, but of a soul overwhelmed by love so vast it approached the unbearable. And Mary looked at him, just looked, and that alone was enough to alter the room, the night, the universe within him. Her gaze carried infinite understanding. It was as though she saw every moment of his life simultaneously, his childhood struggles, his calling, the dreams that guided him, the responsibilities crushing his shoulders, the youth he fought to protect, and the loneliness he never admitted. She saw it all in a single glance, and she loved him through it. The narrator, witnessing this silent exchange, recognized the depth of it. This was not merely an apparition, it was communion, a meeting of two worlds through the heart, a moment that blurred the boundaries of time and existence. Then Mary's lips parted slightly. No sound emerged yet, but even the anticipation of her voice felt like a blessing. Don Bosco dared to lift his eyes, and in that instant, the entire room seemed to vibrate with a warmth so gentle it could mend the cracks of a wounded childhood, yet so powerful it could command the armies of heaven. She lifted one hand, a simple gesture. Grace poured through the space like dawn breaking over a field. And at last, after what felt like a century compressed into a heartbeat, the Virgin Mary spoke. Her voice did not echo. It did not thunder. It did not tremble the walls. It simply was. And because it was, everything else became still. Her voice emerged like a breath carried on light, soft, warm, and impossibly calm. It did not enter the room the way human words do, slipping past the air and vibrating through the ear. No, Mary's voice bypassed all physical boundaries. It entered directly into the heart, as though she spoke the language of the soul itself. "Do not be afraid, my son." Fear had never been in Don Bosco, but hearing her voice dissolved even the smallest tremors of uncertainty that remained in him. The words did not command him. They gathered him. They wrapped themselves around him like a mantle of reassurance. The narrator felt it too. The unmistakable sensation of being addressed by a love so ancient, so tender, and so complete that it made the human heart feel both infinitely small and infinitely precious. Don Bosco lifted his head slightly, eyes shimmering with tears. He struggled to speak, his voice caught between awe and reverence. "Mother, why do you come to me?" The question trembled in the air. Mary smiled, not broadly, but with a softness that felt like dawn breaking over a quiet village. It was the kind of smile that held familiarity, as though she had always known this man, had always walked beside him, had always listened to his prayers, even when he offered them with weary exhaustion. She answered him gently, "Because you carry the burdens of many hearts, and you do so alone." The room stilled again. The narrator sensed the depth of those words. They were not merely a comfort, they were a revelation. Mary was naming the invisible weight he bore, the silent anxieties, the hidden exhaustion, the constant fear that he was not enough for the youth entrusted to him. Few had ever understood these hidden burdens, yet she articulated them with one simple sentence. Don Bosco bowed his head. "I try," he whispered, "but I fail often. I fear I do not guide them well. The youth, so many of them are lost. So many fall away." Mary stepped toward him, not walking, not gliding, but moving with a grace beyond the mechanics of motion. The air shifted subtly around her, a ripple of peace following each subtle gesture. "Your compassion is not failure," she said. "Your tears are not weakness. Your fatigue is not defeat. Every wound you carry for them, my son sees." Her use of "my son" carried a weight that the narrator could feel vibrating through the walls. It was not pride, it was reverence, wrapped in maternal certainty. Don Bosco felt it, too. His shoulders shook with silent emotion. "But tell me, mother, what am I to do? The world grows darker. Their hearts grow restless. The temptations that surround them. His voice broke. How can I protect them all? Mary's gaze deepened. It was not merely sympathetic, it was instructive. Her presence shifted from gentle comfort to luminous wisdom. Guide them to my son, she said. Not through fear, not through force, but through love, patience, and example. This was no poetic ideal. It was strategy, spiritual and practical, rooted in her understanding of how grace moves through fragile human hearts. She raised one hand, palm open, as if measuring the weight of the world. You must form their consciences, she continued. Teach them to recognize truth. Teach them to resist the enemy not with harshness, but with clarity and joy. The narrator felt the truth pulse outward like a wave. This was the pedagogy of heaven, not rules, not threats, but formation. Love anchored in truth, truth wrapped in mercy. Mary stepped closer still. And you, Don Bosco, she said softly, must allow yourself to be guided as well. The priest lowered his gaze again, humbled by the very idea. Mother, I fear I am too weak for this mission. Mary extended her hand toward him, not fully touching, but hovering inches from his forehead. Her presence intensified, not in brightness but in depth, as though the room grew deeper rather than lighter. No one I choose is strong, she said. I choose the willing, not the strong. Strength is given, surrender is offered. The narrator felt those words carve themselves into the air like inscriptions upon invisible stone. They were universal. They were timeless. They echoed through centuries of saints who had trembled before missions larger than themselves. Don Bosco breathed in slowly, his heart absorbing more than his mind could yet grasp. What do you ask of me? He whispered. Mary's expression softened into something both tender and commanding. Continue, she said. Do not falter. Do not fear the obstacles. Do not despair at the failures. I am with you. I walk with your boys. I guard your oratory. Every soul you bring to my son brings joy to heaven. A silence settled, a silence filled not with emptiness but with meaning, as though heaven itself paused to let her words sink into him. The narrator observed the transformation. Don Bosco, moments ago weary and bending beneath invisible burdens, was now absorbing grace as though his soul had opened like a vessel prepared for filling. Mary lowered her hand. And remember, she added gently, your mission is not only to teach, it is to love. Love is the net that draws young hearts back from the abyss. The candle flickered, the room brightened by a fraction of a breath, and the narrator understood. This was the core of the vision. Not spectacle, not prophecy, not celestial drama, but a dialogue of hearts, the mother teaching her son how to save her children. Mary stepped back slightly. There is more you must see, she said. More you must understand. Don Bosco steadied himself, for the vision was far from finished, and Mary was about to reveal what lay beyond the immediate horizon, a horizon filled with signs, symbols, warnings, and hope. Mary's expression shifted, not darkening, not hardening, but deepening in a way that made the very air take on a solemn weight. The warmth in the room did not diminish, but it grew layered, like light passing through stained glass. Something sacred, something heavy, was about to unfold. The narrator sensed it first. The atmosphere thickened, not with fear, but with significance. It was the kind of stillness that precedes revelation, the moment before the curtain of the unseen is drawn back to expose what lies ahead. Don Bosco felt it too. His breath steadied, his trembling ceased. A strange calm, both terrifying and consoling, settled in his chest. He lifted his eyes to the Virgin. What must I see, Mother? He asked. Mary did not answer with words at first. Instead, she raised her hand and gently swept it through the space between them. The room faded, not disappeared, faded, as though the material world were becoming translucent while another world, another truth, rose to the surface. The candle remained lit, but its flame no longer cast shadows. The walls remained, but they were thin like veils. The grain of the wooden floor softened into mist. The narrator recognized this transition. It was the language of visions, heaven shifting reality, like a painter adding a translucent layer over an existing sketch. Nothing was destroyed, everything was repurposed. Then the vision opened. Before Don Bosco appeared a vast plain, stretching outward beyond sight. It was neither day nor night. The sky was an indeterminate twilight, layered with clouds that moved like slow, living thoughts. Across the plain stood towering shapes, structures resembling buildings, walls, towers, and ancient fortresses. But all of them were fractured, as though struck by invisible blows. Cracks ran along their foundations, stones had fallen in piles, wooden beams bent under unseen pressure. Don Bosco stared, heart tightening. "Mother, what is this place?" Mary stood beside him, though she had not moved. In visions, proximity and presence obey no earthly laws. "This," she said gently, "is the world as it becomes when hearts abandon grace." The narrator felt the weight of her words like a whisper pressed against eternity. Mary continued, "The youth you guide walk through a spiritual battlefield. Their souls are tugged between light and darkness, and the structures you see represent the institutions, families, and communities called to protect them." Don Bosco swallowed hard. "They are broken," he whispered. "Yes," Mary said softly, "and many will break further." She extended her hand. Her gesture caused the vision to shift, revealing scenes in sharp, unsettling clarity. He saw young people wandering through the ruins, boys and girls with lost eyes, carrying burdens too heavy for their slight shoulders. Around them slithered shadows, shapeless yet intentional, whispering temptations. These shadows did not touch the youth physically, but their presence pressed against them like cold winds. Don Bosco trembled. Mary spoke again, her voice still gentle but now tinged with sorrow. "The enemy is subtle. He does not storm the gates. He erodes the foundations. He confuses identity, distorts desires, weakens families, and mocks holiness. He distracts hearts until they no longer remember what they were made for." The narrator could feel the trembling of the plane itself, as though reality reacted to her words. Mary lowered her gaze. "But you, my son, must be a light in this ruin. You must rebuild where others have abandoned hope." The plane shifted again. This time the vision darkened, shadows lengthening as though the sun had vanished beneath the horizon. Winds rose, swirling dust around the cracked structures. The youth began to drift farther from the light, moving toward fissures in the ground. Don Bosco gasped. Some of the fissures opened like mouths, exhaling a cold so sharp it felt alive. The shadows circled above them like vultures. "Mother," he whispered, voice breaking, "how can I reach them in time?" Mary turned to him. Her eyes held both tenderness and fierce resolve. "By love," she said, "by perseverance, by sacrifice, but also by vigilance. You must see the dangers for what they are." She extended her other hand, and another scene unfolded. Don Bosco now saw storms massive, spiraling tempests tearing through the plain. They carried no rain, no thunder, no lightning. Instead, they were made of noise, confusion, doubt, cynicism, despair. The winds blew through the youth, shaking them with lies. "You are alone. You are unloved. You are worthless. Your sins define you." The narrator felt those lies like chilling currents, ancient in origin, crafted to penetrate fragile hearts. Don Bosco covered his ears, but the voices penetrated deeper. Mary touched his shoulder lightly, and the voices ceased instantly. "The storms represent ideologies," she explained. "Errors presented as truths, truths twisted into snares. You must teach them to discern, to seek the voice of my son above all others." Don Bosco nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. Then Mary's tone shifted again, soft but with an undercurrent of warning. "There is more." She lifted her gaze. In the distance, a massive structure began to crumble. Not a building, something larger. A wall, a fortress, a symbol. "The church," Don Bosco whispered, recognizing it. Mary nodded. "It will be shaken, not destroyed, but shaken, from within and from without." The narrator felt a ripple of solemnity spread through the plain. "Mother, will it fall?" Don Bosco asked. Mary's eyes flashed with a strength that silenced the winds. "No," she said firmly, "for the foundations rest on my son, but many stones will loosen, many hearts will tremble, many shepherds will falter." She turned to Don Bosco. "And this is why your mission matters. Salvation begins one child at a time, one heart at a time, one act of love at a time." The plane began to dissolve, its edges softening back into mist. "Do not fear the darkness," Mary said. "When you carry the light." The vision faded slowly, gently, until the room of the oratory returned, though it felt changed, as though the walls themselves had witnessed the prophecy. Don Bosco collapsed to his knees again, overwhelmed. Mary stood before him, radiant and calm. "There is another part of the vision," she said, "and it concerns hope, because prophecy, in heaven's language, never ends with destruction. It ends with promise." The night after Don Bosco recounted his vision, I found myself unable to sleep. My thoughts circled the image of the woman. He described the Virgin Mary standing upon the sea, crowned with stars, with a robe that carried more meaning than any language could convey. Don Bosco had spoken of her with a trembling reverence, as though describing someone impossibly near and impossibly beyond reach. And though I was merely a witness to his retelling, not the vision itself, the image would not leave me. It grew in my imagination until it felt almost alive. And I, the third observer to this mystery, realized that this chapter of the vision demanded something deeper than narration. It required analysis, contemplation, and a willingness to step into the symbolism that Don Bosco himself hesitated to interpret. For visions of this kind are not merely seen, they are understood, slowly, painfully, reverently. And so, this chapter is dedicated to that understanding. The mystery of the star-crowned queen and her role in the journey Don Bosco was being drawn into. When Don Bosco described her, it was not in the exaggerated terms of medieval painters, nor in the poetic flourishes of mystics. He spoke with the simplicity of a man who had seen something real and was trying, with limited human vocabulary, to express the inexpressible. She did not shine, he told me. She glowed, as though the light was not around her but from her. This distinction struck me. To shine is to reflect, to glow is to emanate. In other words, this woman's radiance was not borrowed, it belonged to her. Her garments were white, but not a cold, sterile white. Don Bosco described them as containing warmth, which puzzled me until later reflection. Warmth suggests life, breath, presence, the living whiteness of snow under sunrise, not the lifeless whiteness of marble. And the crown, 12 stars arranged not in rigid geometry but in organic, subtle orbit, as though the heavens themselves recognized her, not merely as queen but as mother. In the scriptures, this image appears in the book of Revelation. A woman clothed with the sun, crowned with 12 stars, standing on the moon. But Don Bosco did not claim this was the same woman of Revelation. Instead, he said she was the one who guides the weak and the young, which suggested Mary in her role as help of Christians Auxilium Christianorum, the title Don Bosco cherished. Thus, even before analyzing her gestures or words, her very appearance already communicated something profound. She was a queen, yes, but a queen whose royalty manifested as maternal nearness, not distant power. Don Bosco saw her standing on water, an endless sea, dark but calm. This struck me as one of the most powerful symbols. The sea, in biblical and mystical literature, almost always represents the world in its instability, its dangers, its shifting unpredictability. Water moves, rises, collapses, never remains the same. It is the symbol of chaos, of uncertainty, of the human condition in its fallen state. But she stood upon it, not floating, not struggling to maintain balance, standing, firm, serene, stable. This is no small image. It suggests that she is the anchor in instability, the fixed point where nothing else is fixed. It suggests that her presence offers stability to the souls tossed about by storms, storms of temptation, storms of confusion, storms of history itself. When Don Bosco saw the church later navigating through a violent storm, it became clear that this earlier image of Mary standing calmly on the sea was a theological statement hidden in vision form. Where the church struggles, she stands. Where man trembles, she remains still. Where darkness rises, she does not sink. In other words, she is permanence amidst impermanence. One part of Don Bosco's recounting shocked me with its simplicity. Mary extended her hand toward him. There were no rays of light shooting from her fingers, no dramatic thunder, no display of supernatural power. It was simply the gesture of a mother directing her child. "Ahead," she said, and with that one word, the entire landscape transformed. Her role was not to overwhelm him with divine knowledge, but to guide him step by step. This, I realized, mirrors her role in Christian theology. Not the source of revelation, but the guide leading souls toward revelation. She does not replace truth. She directs toward truth. She does not overshadow Christ. She reveals Christ. Her gesture in the vision embodied this perfectly. Where she pointed, insight followed. Where her hand moved, Don Bosco's understanding grew. She was both compass and companion. What struck me most powerfully, as Don Bosco described this part of the vision, was not what Mary said, but what she did not say. She spoke only a handful of words. The rest was silence pregnant, meaningful, unsettling silence. At first, I thought this silence was simply the natural accompaniment of a mystical vision. But as I listened more carefully, something became clear. Her silence was intentional. It was not empty. It was a form of communication. What kind of communication? Perhaps this: there are truths the soul must discover, not be given. Mysteries we must approach, not receive fully formed. Paths we must walk, not be carried through. Her silence created space for Don Bosco to discern, to wrestle, to interpret. It was the silence of a mother who knows her child must grow, not by being given answers, but by learning to seek them. Many speak of Mary's maternal tenderness, but Don Bosco's vision revealed something far deeper: her maternal authority. She was gentle, yes, but not fragile. She was peaceful, but not passive. Her motherhood carried weight, command, gravity. This balance fascinated me as a third-party observer, for here was a woman who inspired both affection and obedience. Her very presence conveyed, "You are safe," but also, "You must rise." Don Bosco said. Her gaze pierced him, not with judgment, but with expectation. She did not demand perfection from him. She demanded mission. And that, I think, is the heart of Marian devotion, as Don Bosco lived it. Not sentimental admiration, but transformation. She does not merely comfort, she commissions. At the end of Don Bosco's description, I asked him, "What do you think she wanted you to understand?" He hesitated, then answered with humility, "I think she wanted me to understand. The path is long, the sea is dark, the storms will come, and I am not to walk alone." And that, perhaps, is the essence of her message. Not a prophecy, not a doctrinal lesson, a presence. She was there. She walked with him. She guided where needed, stepped back where needed, empowered always. As an observer, hearing his account secondhand, I found myself drawn into the same questions Don Bosco must have wrestled with. Why her? Why now? Why these symbols? Why this mixture of majesty and simplicity? In reflecting on these, I realized something profoundly important. Mary appears not to astonish the intellect, but to awaken the conscience. Her visions are not puzzles, they are invitations. She does not aim to shock the senses, but to strengthen the soul. Don Bosco's vision was not meant to explain the future, but to prepare him for it. And in preparing him, she prepared the rest of us who would later walk in his footsteps. This chapter, then, is more than an analysis. It is a doorway into the same mystery he glimpsed. The star-crowned queen does not merely appear in visions. She appears in history, quietly guiding, silently strengthening, always present, never intrusive. And that, for a world drowning in storms, may be the greatest revelation of all. For several days after Don Bosco recounted his vision of the star-crowned queen, there was a strange heaviness in the oratory. The boys carried on with their games, their laughter echoing in the courtyard, but underneath it all there lingered a tension, like the final pause before a storm breaks. Perhaps they sensed something in Don Bosco's face, or perhaps the spiritual atmosphere itself had shifted. I, as the quiet observer of his inner world, felt it more deeply than most. Don Bosco was not the same. Not disturbed, not frightened, no. Something else had taken root in him. A solemnity, a mission awareness, a kind of inward gravity that made even his simplest gestures feel precise and purposeful. And though he did not say it directly, I knew the reason. A vision like the one he had experienced does not end when the images fade. It begins. This chapter is the unfolding of that beginning, the prophetic path that Mary silently placed before him, the mission that stretched far beyond his time. and the implications for the church he loved with every fiber of his being. The morning after his vision, Don Bosco walked through the courtyard with unusual focus. He watched the boys with soft eyes yet firm conviction. It was as though he saw beyond their laughter and mischief, saw wounds invisible to others, saw futures not yet formed, saw souls tossed on seas they themselves did not understand. His vision had awakened something, a mandate, a calling, a responsibility he had not fully grasped before. Mary's gesture, her hand pointing ahead, became his interior compass. He repeated her word often under his breath. Avanti, avanti, forward, forward, not upward, not backward, forward. This direction revealed something essential. Mary was not calling him to escape the world's dangers, but to confront them. She was not pulling him into heavenly withdrawal, but sending him into earthly mission. In that realization, I saw a shift. Don Bosco stopped viewing himself as a caretaker of the young. He began to see himself as a frontline soldier assigned to a battlefield disguised as a playground. Though he shared only fragments with me, I sensed there was more to his vision than he had spoken. Shadows of future storms, hints of battles involving not only the oratory but the church as a whole. But these things, Don Bosco said one evening, are not yet for everyone's ears. His reluctance did not stem from fear but from discernment. Prophecy, for him, was not spectacle. It was stewardship. He spoke slowly, piecing together the meaning of what he had seen. A sea growing turbulent, towers representing truth and charity, hostile winds symbolizing ideological storms, a wounded church seeking anchorage, the presence of Mary as guide and protector, the future purified through trials. Yet he insisted, these things must not be interpreted as doom. They are purification. This distinction is vital. Many prophets warn of catastrophe. Don Bosco warned of conversion, not destruction, but renewal, not despair, but resilience. His prophetic landscape was not a funeral pyre, it was a forge. One night, while sitting alone with Don Bosco in the dimly lit chapel, he confided something that startled me. The greatest battle is not between good and evil, he said softly. It is between clarity and confusion. This insight came directly from his vision of Mary standing upon the dark sea. The sea represented not evil in the dramatic sense, but the ambiguity, instability, and moral fog that humans too easily mistake for freedom. Confusion is subtle. It does not roar. It whispers. It does not destroy directly. It erodes. Don Bosco saw that the future of the church would not be threatened primarily by persecution or external attack, but by internal disorientation. Truth blurred, charity misinterpreted, identity forgotten. He saw a world in which hearts grow warm, but beliefs grow cold. Compassion is praised, but virtue is neglected. Spirituality is sought without obedience. Noise replaces prayer. Enthusiasm replaces depth. Mary's silence in the vision was, in this light, not absence but remedy. In a world drowning in noise, silence is clarity. Her gestures were the antidote to confusion, simple, unmistakable, maternal. A critical insight surfaced as Don Bosco reflected on the Marian dimension of his vision. Mary's authority does not resemble the authority of kings or generals. It is a maternal authority, quiet but uncompromising, gentle but immovable. Maternal authority is often underestimated because it does not manifest through coercion. It manifests through love that demands growth. Don Bosco said it in a way I will never forget. Her authority is not a command, it is an invitation that one cannot refuse. This is why she appears in times of crisis, not to dominate, but to realign, not to threaten, but to remind, not to overwhelm the will, but to awaken it. Her motherhood is not sentimental. It is strategic. It forms saints, shapes movements, redirects history. And Don Bosco, in trembling humility, accepted that he had been chosen to participate in this maternal mission, not as her servant, but as her instrument. Though Don Bosco remained cheerful among the boys, in private moments a weight pressed upon him. He knew that visions do not occur without consequence. They carry responsibility, expectation, sacrifice. I did not ask to be shown these things, he confessed. But now that I have seen, I cannot pretend blindness. This is the torment of the prophet. knowing that to speak too soon may confuse, but to delay too long may endanger. Don Bosco walked this tension carefully. Each day he prayed for discernment. Each night he wrestled with silence. And I realized something profoundly human about him. He did not see himself as extraordinary. He saw the vision as extraordinary, and himself as its unworthy messenger. That humility, more than anything, made him trustworthy. As Don Bosco shared more fragments of the vision, a larger narrative began to form, one that stretched far beyond the oratory, and even beyond his century. He foresaw attacks on the unity of the church, moral destabilization among the youth, ideological forces seeking to dismantle faith, confusion disguised as progress, a world losing its sense of God, but ultimately, a triumphant renewal led by Mary and the Eucharist. These elements were not presented as details in the vision, but as impressions, spiritual insights that flowed from what he had seen. He was careful to emphasize this. Prophecy does not tell us what will happen, it tells us how to remain faithful when it does. Thus, his vision was not fatalistic. It was formative. It prepared hearts instead of frightening them. As the third-party observer, I found myself caught between awe and responsibility. Listening to Don Bosco was like standing near a man who had seen a fire no one else could see. The warmth reached me, but the flames remained invisible. I asked myself, why was I allowed to hear this? What was my role in this unfolding story? Was I merely a recorder, or was I being changed as well? The more I pondered, the clearer it became. The vision was not meant for Don Bosco alone. It was meant for all who would later walk in an age of confusion. In this sense, I realized something chilling. We are living in the storm he foresaw. And something consoling. We are guided by the same star-crowned Queen. Mary did not give Don Bosco a vision for admiration, but for preparation. A map for those who would face chaos. A message for generations who would be tempted to despair. A prophecy not of fear, but of fidelity. When the vision reached its final moment, the silence around Don Bosco thickened until it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Mary stood before him in a radiance that no earthly light could imitate. Soft, living, almost breathing like the final glow of a sunset that refuses to die. Her eyes held both sorrow and strength, the unmistakable tenderness of a mother who sees danger approaching yet trusts that grace is stronger than any darkness. "My son," she said, her voice carrying the calm weight of eternity, "what you have seen tonight is not simply a warning, nor merely a prophecy. It is a reflection of the human heart and the battlefield on which my children must fight." She lifted her gaze slightly, as if the unseen realms themselves were opening above them. There will be storms, there will be wolves, there will be times when the world loses its sense of heaven. But teach the young to cling to hope, even when the night is heaviest. Their purity, their courage, their faith, these will be the torches that keep the darkness from consuming them. Don Bosco felt something within him tremble, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of a mission too sacred to measure. Mary stepped closer, and the edges of her form grew almost transparent, as if she were already belonging more to heaven than to earth. "Remember this," she said. "You are not alone. The path is steep, the labor heavy, but heaven walks with you. I walk with you. Every soul entrusted to you is a spark that must be guarded from the wind. Lead them to my son with gentleness, with patience, with the courage that comes from love. And when you feel overwhelmed, call upon me. A mother never abandons her children." Her hand rose as though to bless him, and a warmth spread through the room, a warmth so deep it reached even the cracks in the walls, the wooden floor, the weary heart of the priest kneeling before her. The light surrounding her pulsed once, like the final note of a celestial melody, and then dimmed gently. The oratory returned to its ordinary darkness, but Don Bosco knew it would never again be the same. He remained kneeling, breath unsteady, mind shattered and restored all at once. The vision had ended, yet the mission had only begun. And though the room now held only a single candle and the faint chill of night, something unseen lingered, still a quiet certainty, a mother's promise, a heavenly echo repeating in the depths of his soul. "I am with you.